My name is Jackson, and if you are listening to me today, it is because I need to tell the truth. Not just for myself, not just for Maria, but because silence has already destroyed too much of my life, the memory that never leaves me the moment. That shattered everything was in a sterile, white hospital room. The walls smelled of disinfectant, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above, and I could hear Charles's voice trembling with rage. He was standing at the end of the bed, holding a single piece of paper that felt heavier than 1,000 stones. His wife, my Maria, lay weak from childbirth, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, her arms curled protectively around the tiny infant sleeping at her chest. And I stood there too, unable to breathe, as Charles unfolded the paper like it contained the final verdict of our lives. The DNA test. I will never forget the way Charles's eyes burned into me before he even read the result aloud. He didn't need to. His face said it all. His jaw tightened, his hands shook, and the silence that stretched in that room was louder than thunder. The baby was not his, the baby was mine. Maria gasped softly, a sound that was part sob, part prayer. She clutched the child tighter, as if she could shield it from the truth. And me. I felt my knees weaken under the crushing weight of guilt, love, and fear. That moment was the end. But to understand how we arrived there, you must follow me back to the beginning, when Maria walked into my life again, not as a lover, but as a stranger knocking on the door of my company. 6 months earlier, I was not a broken man. I was the boss of a flourishing company, a man who wore power like a well-tailored suit. To my employees, I was firm, decisive, respected. But behind my polished desk and sharp suits, there was a loneliness I never let anyone see. And then one morning, the receptionist buzzed my office and told me a new applicant was waiting. She was interviewing for the position of my personal secretary. I remember looking up when the door opened, and for a split second, I thought my heart had stopped. Maria, my Maria, the first love of my youth, she stepped into my office like a ghost. From the past made flesh, dressed in a modest blouse and skirt, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. Her eyes widened when they met mine, and for a brief instant, I saw recognition flare, then quickly fade beneath professionalism. "Good morning, Mr. Jackson," she said softly, as though my name was something fragile on her lips. I should have dismissed her. I should have refused her application then and there, because in that moment I already felt the walls of my carefully built life beginning to crack. But I didn't. Instead, I offered her a seat and forced a smile. Miss Evans, please tell me about yourself." She looked down, and I could see her wedding band glinting faintly. It was like a dagger to my chest. Maria was married now. Her husband worked here to Charles, one of my mid-level managers. A diligent man, quiet, reliable. He had no idea that his wife had once been my everything. The interview was a blur. I barely heard her words. All I could see was the girl I had once walked through rainstorms with, the girl I had once kissed beneath fading sunsets, the girl who had been ripped from me by time and circumstance. And now here she was, sitting across from me like fate was mocking us both. When she left my office, I sank into my chair, torn between relief and devastation. But later that afternoon, when I signed the hiring papers, I knew I had crossed the first line in a story that could only end in tragedy. The first weeks were awkward. Maria was quiet, reserved, efficient. She kept her distance, addressing me with the same formality as every other employee. But every time she entered my office, I felt the air change, heavy with unspoken history. I caught myself staring too long, listening too intently when she spoke. Sometimes, when she bent over my desk to place a file in front of me, I could smell the faint trace of her perfume, floral, delicate, achingly familiar. One late evening, when most of the office had cleared out, I found her still at her desk outside my office. She was typing furiously, trying to finish a report. I leaned against the doorframe and watched her for a moment. "You work too hard," I said quietly. She startled, then looked up at me with tired eyes. "So do you, sir." The word "sir" stung. I walked closer, lowering my voice. "Don't call me that. Not when we're alone." Her lips parted, and for a moment, the mask slipped. I saw the Maria I had once known, raw and unguarded. But then she shook her head, her voice trembling. "We shouldn't, Jackson. I'm married now." I nodded, but inside, the fire only grew. Weeks turned into months, and resistance turned into stolen moments. A lingering glance, a brush of hands when passing a folder, a late-night conversation. That stretched too long, until laughter turned into silence, and silence turned into something deeper. The first time it happened, it was raining outside just like the old days. We were trapped in the office late, working on a proposal. When the storm grew violent, I offered to drive her home. She hesitated, then agreed. In the car, the tension was unbearable. At a red light, I turned to look at her. She was staring out the window, her reflection in the glass painted with sorrow. "Maria," I whispered. She turned, and in that instant, all the years between us vanished. I leaned in, and before either of us could stop it, our lips met. It was both a sin and a salvation. That kiss was the spark that set everything ablaze. What began as hesitation became routine. We started meeting in secret coffee shops far from the office, late-night phone calls whispered under blankets, moments stolen between meetings. I told myself I still had control, but deep down, I knew I was falling again, harder than before, and yet, shadows began to creep in. Charles was not a fool. He noticed the way Maria stayed late at work. He noticed the faint smile she carried when she returned home. I could see it in his eyes whenever he passed my office door on his knees, a suspicion brewing quietly. At first, I ignored it. I thought we could hide it, but love like ours was never meant to be hidden forever, and then came the news that changed everything. Maria was pregnant. Maria sat across from me in the dim light of my office, her hands trembling as they clutched the edge of her chair. The blinds were drawn, the clock ticked softly, and the whole world seemed to pause around us. "I'm late," she whispered. The words hit me like a blow. I froze, staring at her as though she had spoken in another language. She swallowed hard, her eyes filling with tears. "Jackson, I think I'm pregnant." My heart began to pound so violently I thought it might split open. My breath caught, and for a moment, all I could do was stare at her, at the woman I loved, and the impossible truth that had just unraveled from her lips. "Are you sure?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She nodded, one tear sliding down her cheek. "I've taken 2 tests. Both were positive." I leaned back in my chair, pressing my fingers to my temples, trying to think, to breathe, to understand what this meant. My mind spun through possibilities, consequences, dangers. Maria was married. The child could not be explained away. Charles would know. Maria's voice cracked through my thoughts. "What are we going to do?" The way she said we both comforted and destroyed me. It meant she still saw us as together, but it also meant we were bound to a sin that had no escape. I stood and walked to her, crouching down so we were eye level. I took her hands in mine, firm but gentle. "We'll figure it out. Whatever happens, Maria, I won't leave you." "Not again." Her lips trembled as she whispered, "But what about Charles?" The name hung between us like a curse. The weeks that followed were a labyrinth of lies and stolen time. Maria became more withdrawn at home, careful with her words, careful with her smile. But Charles was watching. One afternoon, he appeared in my office unannounced. He knocked once, then stepped in before I could answer. "Mr. Jackson," he said, his voice flat. "May I have a word?" I gestured stiffly to the chair across from me, masking the unease that immediately prickled under my skin. He didn't sit. Instead, he stood tall, his arms crossed, his eyes scanning my face like a hawk searching for weakness. "Maria hasn't been herself lately," he said slowly. "I've noticed she stays late at work. She's distant at home, tired, restless." His gaze hardened. "I want to know if something's wrong." The question was pointed, sharp, meant to pierce through my composure. I forced a calm smile. "Maria is one of my best employees. She's dedicated, yes, but nothing more. If she's tired, it's because she's been working hard. That's all." Charles studied me for a long, unbearable silence. I could feel sweat prickling at the back of my neck. Finally, he gave a short nod. "I hope you're right, because Maria is my wife, and I'd hate to think she was keeping secrets from me." When he left, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. But deep down, I knew. Charles already suspected. Maria's pregnancy could not be hidden forever. She began wearing looser clothes at work, but her body was changing, and soon whispers spread through the office corridors. The news traveled faster than we anticipated, and inevitably, it reached Charles. One evening, Maria called me from the bathroom of her house. Her voice was hushed, frantic. "He knows, Jackson. He asked me tonight if the baby was his." My stomach dropped. "What did you say?" I told him yes, she said, her voice breaking. "I had to. What else could I say?" But I could see it in his eyes. "He doesn't believe me. He's planning something." A cold dread wrapped itself around me. "Maria, listen to me. Whatever happens, I'll protect you and the baby. No matter what Charles does, he can't take you away from me again. But Even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. Charles's suspicion soon turned into action. One morning, he barged into my office, his face pale but his jaw tight with determination. "I want a DNA test done," he announced bluntly. The words nearly knocked the air from my lungs. I forced a frown. "What are you talking about? My wife is pregnant, and I deserve to know the truth." His voice was icy. "If the child is mine, good. If not, I will not be made a fool of." For a moment, rage flared in me, rage that he would speak of Maria and the child so coldly, as though they were possessions to be claimed or discarded. But I swallowed it back. "And does Maria know about this?" I asked carefully. "She will," he said. His eyes narrowed, locking onto mine like a predator closing in. "I'll make sure of it." And then he turned and left, leaving me trembling with the realization that the storm we had tried to outrun had finally caught us. The day of the test arrived like a guillotine. Maria sat in the hospital room, her face pale, her hands folded protectively over her swollen belly. I stood near the window, staring out at the parking lot below, every muscle in my body tense. Charles paced the floor like a soldier before battle. The nurse came in, cheerful and oblivious to the silent war being waged in that room. She explained the procedure gently, collecting samples, speaking about results in a few weeks. But none of us truly heard her. The air was suffocating, each breath shallow with fear. Maria tried to speak to Charles once, her voice soft, pleading. "Please, Charles, this stress isn't good for me or the baby. Can't we just—" He cut her off sharply. "We'll wait for the results. Then we'll see." The cruelty in his tone made my fists clench. I wanted to shout, to defend her, to confess everything then and there. But I stayed silent because I knew my words would only add fuel to his fire. When the nurse left, the silence returned. Maria's eyes flicked to me, just for an instant. In that single glance, I saw everything: her fear, her love, her desperation. And I knew she was silently asking me the same question I had asked myself 1,000 times. What happens when the truth comes out? And I had no answer. The results didn't come that day. We had to wait. Those weeks were the longest of my life. Every day I went to the office, pretending to work, while dread gnawed at my insides. Every night, Maria called me in tears, terrified of what would happen. And Charles, he grew colder, more distant, like a man sharpening a blade in the dark. Finally, the day came when the results were delivered. Charles was the one who picked up the envelope, and with that, we returned to the moment I will never forget: the sterile hospital room, the buzzing fluorescent lights, and Charles's voice trembling with rage as he unfolded the truth. Charles had the report. I could see it in the stiffness of his shoulders, the way his hand clutched the folded paper like it was both proof and poison. He didn't confront us right away, not with the loud, angry storm I half expected. Instead, he sank into something darker, quieter. That's what made it worse. At the office, he still came to work on time, still managed his team, still wore the neat ties Maria ironed for him. But he was no longer the Charles who laughed at office banter or offered polite nods during meetings. He had become silent, watchful, and he watched me. I would catch his eyes lingering from across the glass conference table, not with outright accusation, but with something sharper, heavier. It was as if he was waiting for me to slip, waiting for me to expose the truth. With a careless glance toward Maria, a word said too tenderly, a gesture too familiar. Maria felt it too. At home, she told me in whispers over late-night phone calls. "Jackson, he doesn't talk to me like he used to," she confessed, her voice trembling. "He just stares. He comes home, eats in silence, and goes to bed without saying a word. I feel like I'm living with a stranger." And I knew he was building the storm in his mind. One evening, as I left the office, I noticed Charles's car parked across the street. He wasn't going anywhere. He wasn't on the phone. He was just sitting there, eyes fixed on the entrance of the building, hands gripping the steering wheel. Was he waiting to see if Maria came out with me? Was he tracing her footsteps? Or was he simply imagining it all in his head, letting suspicion eat away at his sanity? The paranoia grew worse with each passing week. Maria told me he had started asking subtle questions at home, little traps, laid with care. "What time did you finish work today? Did Jackson keep you late again? You seem tired. Did something happen?" He never accused her outright. He never shouted. He just let the questions drip, slow as poison, until Maria confessed to me one night, sobbing into the phone, "I can't breathe anymore. I feel like every move I make is under a microscope. Every word I say, he weighs it, studies it, twists it, And in truth, I wasn't doing any better. I told myself that what Maria and I shared was love, an old flame reignited, something that destiny itself had placed back in my path. But at night, when the office was quiet and I was alone with my thoughts, I could feel the guilt pressing on my chest like a heavy stone. Charles trusted me once. He had come into my office years ago, shaking my hand with genuine respect. He had spoken highly of me to others, calling me a leader, a mentor. And now here I was betraying him in the worst way imaginable. That thought clawed at me more and more as Charles's silence deepened. There were moments I caught myself rehearsing explanations in my head. If he confronts me, what will I say? If he strikes me, will I take the blow or fight back? If he demands the truth, do I give him the whole of it or bury it deeper still? It felt like we were all standing on a frozen lake, the ice beneath our feet groaning, cracking, threatening to give way. None of us wanted to make the first move, but we all knew it couldn't last. One Friday evening, things took a darker turn. Maria called me in a panic. "Jackson," she whispered, her voice low, as if Charles might be listening. "He went through my phone. He asked me why your name appears so much in my call history. I told him it's because you're my boss, that we talk about work, but Jackson, he didn't believe me. He didn't say anything. He just stared at me with this look. I've never seen that look before. It's like he already knows." I froze in my chair, the weight of her words sinking into me. Already knows. The truth was, I had underestimated Charles. I had imagined he would explode quickly, accuse loudly, and end it all in fire. But this slow unraveling, this quiet stalking of the truth, it was far worse. He was holding the rage inside, letting it ripen, sharpen, until the blade would cut deepest, and when that blade finally fell, I had no doubt it would cut through all of us. The following week at work, he walked into my office. Not knocking, not asking, just walking in like he owned the space. His eyes swept over my desk, then up to mine. "Busy, Jackson?" he asked flatly. His voice was calm, just the usual. I replied carefully. He didn't smile. He didn't sit. He just stood there, letting the silence stretch until the air felt thick. Finally, he said, "Maria's been different lately. You noticed?" Every instinct screamed at me to tread carefully. "She's been working hard. That can take a toll." He nodded slowly, as though considering my answer, but his eyes never left mine. "Working hard, right?" And then, just as suddenly, he turned and left. It was the calm before the storm. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining him at home, sitting at the dinner table with Maria, watching her across the candlelight with that same cold stare. Imagining him walking past the nursery, pausing at the door, listening to the soft breaths of the child that might not be his. It was unbearable, and yet I couldn't stop myself from wanting Maria, from needing her, from holding on to the belief that somehow, despite everything, what we had was worth it. But Charles's silence was no longer the silence of a wounded man. It was the silence of a predator waiting in the dark, crouched low, ready to strike, and deep down, I knew the strike was coming soon. The night it finally happened, there were no warnings, no questions, no sidelong glances, no subtle tests, just fire. Maria had invited me over, reckless, maybe, but she said Charles was working late and she couldn't take the silence anymore. She needed to see me, needed to feel that I was real, and not just some ghost on the other end of whispered phone calls. I should have said no, God. I should have said no, but I didn't. When I arrived, the house was dark except for a single lamp in the living room. Maria was waiting by the window, her arms wrapped around herself like she'd been trembling for hours. She rushed into me the moment I closed the door, burying her face in my chest. "Jackson," she whispered, "I can't live like this anymore. Every day I feel him watching, waiting. I'm going to break." I stroked her hair, holding her tighter. "We'll figure it out, Maria. Will." The sound of the front door slamming cut me off. We both froze. Heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway, steady and deliberate. My blood went cold. Maria's nails dug into my arm. Then Charles appeared in the doorway. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't even moving fast. He just stood there, his coat still on, his eyes locked on us like a man who had been rehearsing this moment for weeks. "Well," he said, his voice low, steady, almost calm. "I thought I might find you here," Maria gasped. "Charles, please, please." "What?" He cut in, his tone sharp enough to slice the air. He stepped forward, his eyes flicking from her to me. "Please forgive you. Please pretend I don't see what's right in front of me." I forced myself to speak. Charles, listen, don't you dare, he snapped, his calmness finally cracking. His voice thundered through the room. Don't you dare say a word, Jackson. You, of all people. The weight of his gaze crushed me. I had betrayed him in ways words couldn't defend. And yet Maria was trembling beside me, tears spilling down her face, and I couldn't just stand there. Charles, she cried, stepping toward him. I never meant, he roared, his face twisting with rage. Never meant to what? To lie to me every night? To let me raise a child that isn't mine? To crawl behind my back with him of all people? Maria crumpled, sobbing, her hands reaching out as though to touch him, to beg for mercy. But Charles recoiled like her touch burned. You disgust me. He spat. Both of you. I stepped forward, my voice breaking. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I never wanted to. Shut up. He bellowed, the veins in his neck straining. His fists clenched at his sides, and for a terrifying moment, I thought he might strike me. Or worse, strike her. But instead, he turned his fury back on Maria. Tell me the truth, he demanded. His voice shook, raw and ragged now. Is she mine? Is that little girl upstairs even mine? Maria's sobs grew louder. She shook her head violently, collapsing to her knees. Charles, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. His face broke. I saw it then, the mask of rage crumbling, giving way to the raw, unfiltered pain underneath. She's not mine, he whispered hoarsely. All this time, she was never mine. It was like watching a man shatter from the inside out. Maria tried to crawl toward him, clutching at his legs, but he pushed her away with trembling hands. Don't touch me. Don't you dare touch me. I couldn't stay silent anymore. Charles, I know you have every right to hate me, but don't take it out on her. Please, he spun on me, his eyes blazing. Don't take it out on her. You think I don't see it? You think I don't know what she is to you now? You, my mentor, my friend sneaking into my house, into my life, into my wife. The words struck harder than any blow could have. I trusted you, Jackson. I trusted you with everything. And you, his voice cracked. His chest heaved as though the weight of it all was suffocating him. You've destroyed me, Maria sobbed louder, rocking back and forth on the floor. I stood frozen, guilt and shame anchoring me where I was. Finally, Charles staggered back, pressing a hand to his temple. His breathing was ragged, uneven. For a moment, I thought he might collapse. But then he steadied himself, straightened his shoulders, and looked at us with a coldness I'd never seen before. It's over, he said flatly. Do you hear me? Whatever this is, whatever you thought you had, it's over. I want you out of my house, Jackson. And Maria, his voice faltered just slightly, but he forced it steady again. Maria, you'll hear from my lawyer. And with that, he turned and walked out. The sound of the door slamming behind him echoed like the final nail in a coffin. Maria lay crumpled on the carpet, her sobs breaking the silence. I stood there, shaking, unable to move, unable to breathe. The storm had broken, and nothing, not my words, not her tears, not his rage could put it back together again. The house was quiet after I left, but my head was anything but. Every word, every sob, every look, they chased me out into the night like wolves. I drove without direction, my knuckles white against the steering wheel, my vision blurring with rage and grief. The city lights bled together, neon smearing across the windshield. I could barely breathe. She's not mine. She was never mine. The thoughts spun endlessly, like a cruel mantra I couldn't silence. I finally stopped when the car began to shake under my trembling hands. I pulled over in some forgotten stretch of road outside town, turned off the engine, and sat there in the dark. My chest heaved, my body trembling like it might tear itself apart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip the night open with my rage. But all that came out was a broken sob. How long had they been laughing at me? How long had they been whispering behind closed doors while I sat at the head of the table like some blind fool? My mind clawed through every memory, every gesture. Jackson staying late after meetings. Maria glancing at her phone with that small, secret smile. The nights she said she was too tired. The mornings when she looked guilty and I didn't know. It was all there. It had always been there. I had just chosen not to see it. I pounded the steering wheel, the sound echoing in the hollow car. Goddamn you! I roared to her, to him, to myself, because the truth was clear. I wasn't just betrayed. I was complicit. I had built the prison with my own hands, brick by brick, ignoring the cracks because I wanted to believe in love, in loyalty, in family, and now it was all ash. I didn't go home that night. Couldn't. The thought of walking into that house, of hearing the creak of the stairs, of seeing her shadow in the window, it would kill me. Instead, I drove aimlessly until dawn, the sky paling into a colorless gray. I ended up in front of an old motel, the kind with peeling paint and flickering neon. I paid cash, kept my head down, and shut myself inside a room that smelled of mildew and despair. There, in the dim yellow light, I unraveled. I drank from the dusty minibar until the bottles were gone. I tore the sheets off the bed, kicked the chair across the room, shattered a lamp, but none of it was enough. None of it dulled the fire inside. I saw Maria's face every time I closed my eyes. The way she had crumpled, sobbing, begging, reaching for me, and Jackson's. God. Jackson, the man I had trusted with everything. The man who had stood beside me in boardrooms, who had clapped me on the back after victories, who had been closer than a brother. I wanted to hate him. And I did. But worse, I hated myself for still hearing his voice in my head, steady, loyal, convincing me he'd never betray me. I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to shut it out, but the silence only made it louder. Days passed in a blur. I didn't answer calls, didn't check emails, didn't go to the office. The world moved on without me, and I let it. I lived in that motel, crawling deeper into the pit. The mirror became my enemy. Every time I caught my reflection, I saw a hollowed-out man, eyes bloodshot, skin pale, jaw unshaven. A man broken. The DNA papers lay on the nightstand. I had carried them with me like a talisman, proof that I wasn't crazy, proof that my pain had weight. But the more I stared at them, the less they made sense. Just words and numbers on a page, and yet they had torn my life apart. Sometimes, late at night, I would whisper to myself, as though speaking to the void, "She was mine. She was mine." But the echo always came back cruel and hollow. No, she never was. It was the third night when I finally snapped. I woke from a dream of her, Maria, smiling, holding my hand, her lips brushing mine. For a moment, in the fog of sleep, I believed it. Believed we were still us. Believed nothing had happened, but then reality hit, sharp as a knife. I sat up, drenched in sweat, the motel clock blinking 3:12. And something inside me broke. I staggered into the bathroom, stared at myself in the cracked mirror. My reflection stared back, gaunt and wild-eyed. "A stranger, you're nothing," I whispered to him. "Nothing." I punched the mirror. Glass shattered, slicing my knuckles. Blood welled up, dripping into the sink. But I didn't stop. I hit it again and again, until the shards clung to the frame like teeth. The pain was real. Finally, something real. I slumped to the floor, clutching my bleeding hand, shaking with sobs. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just mourning Maria or Jackson. I was mourning myself. The man I had been before, the man who believed in trust, in love, in family, was gone, and in his place was nothing. Just silence. By the end of the week, I had vanished from the world. No one knew where I was. Not Maria, not Jackson, not anyone. And maybe that was better, because the man who had walked out of that house, the husband, the father, the friend, was already dead. All that remained was a shadow, a hollow shell, a man haunted by the sound of his wife's sobs and the betrayal of his brother, a man who had nothing left to lose. The motel room was suffocating. Days had stretched into nights, nights into endless hours of silence, and I realized I could not live like this. Not in hiding, not in torment. I wrapped my bleeding hand, gathered what little I had, and drove back toward the city. The streets looked the same, but I wasn't the same man who had left. Something in me had burned out, leaving only cold clarity. The house loomed before me. My house. Or at least, it had been. I stood at the door for a long time, staring at the familiar shape of it, the memories etched into its walls. Maria's laughter in the kitchen, the little girl's voice calling me daddy, Jackson's footsteps on the stairs, all ghosts now. I opened the door. Inside, Maria sat at the dining table, her face pale, her eyes swollen from crying. The papers were spread before her like a funeral shroud. She looked up when I entered, and for a moment, just a moment, her eyes lit with hope. "Charles," she whispered, rising to her feet. I raised a hand to stop her. "Don't." The word was sharp enough to freeze her where she stood. There was silence between us. The kind of silence that carries the weight of years, of everything unspoken, everything shattered. Finally, she tried. I never meant to hurt you. It was a mistake, Charles. One I regret every day. Please, Don't leave me like this." Her voice cracked. She reached for me, trembling. I stepped back. "Maria," I said quietly, my voice steady now. "What you destroyed, it can't be rebuilt. I don't hate you. I don't even know if I love you anymore. But I know this trust is gone. And without it, there is nothing." Tears ran down her face. She clutched at her chest like I had stabbed her, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I gave you my heart, my name, my life, and you gave them away to him. I glanced at the empty chair across the table where Jackson had once sat. "To my brother," she sobbed, collapsing back into the chair, her body shaking. I turned away. The office came next. Jackson was waiting. He looked thinner, his usual arrogance dimmed, but his eyes still carried that steel, that pride. "Charles," he said, standing as I entered. "You finally came." I looked at him, really looked at him. This was the man I had trusted most, the man I had once believed would never betray me. And now, he was just another stranger. "You've ruined everything," I said, my voice low. He didn't flinch. "I never meant for it to happen like this. I loved her. I still do. And she loved me. You can hate me, and I deserve that. But at least know I didn't do this to spite you. I did it because I couldn't stop." I stared at him, searching his face for some trace of the friend I once knew. But there was nothing. "You took my wife," I said flatly. "You took my daughter. You took the one thing I thought was mine." Jackson swallowed hard but didn't respond. The silence stretched, heavy as stone. Finally, I stepped closer, my eyes never leaving his. "You can keep her, Jackson. Keep the house, keep the lies, keep whatever is left. But hear me now, I'm done with both of you." He blinked, stunned. "You're walking away?" Yes, my voice was final, cold, because staying in this war would mean destroying myself. And I've already lost enough. For the first time, Jackson's composure cracked. His mouth trembled as though he wanted to speak, but the words never came. I turned and left. That evening, I drove until I found myself standing at the edge of the city, watching the sun bleed across the horizon. I thought of Maria, of Jackson, of the little girl who would grow up never knowing the truth, or maybe one day learning it and hating them for it. I thought of the man I used to be, and I realized he was gone for good, but maybe that was all right. Sometimes, to survive, you have to let the fire consume what was and walk out of the ashes as something new. I didn't know who I was anymore. Husband? Brother? Father? Betrayed man? None of it fit. What I knew was this: I wasn't theirs anymore. Not Maria's. Not Jackson's. Not anyone's fool. I was free. And for the first time in weeks, I breathed without pain. The night swallowed me whole. As I walked away from it all, leaving behind the lies, the betrayal, the shattered pieces of a life I once thought unbreakable, I didn't know where the road would take me, but I knew one thing for certain: this chapter was over.